Advertising reflects the times in which it is created. Because of this, a lot of advertising has reflected awful depictions and stereotypes of other cultures. And thanks to the far-reaching arm that is the European Empire, we as a whole once considered most cultures beneath us, often opting to satirize, caricaturize, or outright ostracize them, before slapping a mockery of them on our latest capitalist venture that's only vaguely related to said mockery to begin with. In the last few years, a few big-name brands have seen near demise thanks to their unfortunate attachment to mascots who, for one reason or another, didn't particularly age well. It even got to the point where Eskimo pies have been renamed. And I'm not making fun of these changes, for the record. The people hurt by these deserve to stop being marginalized and have their voices heard for once. However, I think the history still needs to be shown to see how we started, how we got here, and where it's all going, and I guess I'm putting myself to the task. I'm Cody Streeter, and this is Dead Mascots Cultural Adpropriation.
What's up, Doc?
I'm hunting weapons.
For the first time ever on DVD, a 24-karat collection of classic Looney Tunes.
I'm rich! I'm rich! Yahoo!
In the mid to late 2000s, Warner Brothers started releasing a series of DVD sets titled the Looney Tunes Golden Collections, which included numerous classic Looney Tunes cartoons. Continuing a pattern which began with Volume 3, the Volume 5 DVD set has a warning in the beginning of each disc that states that some of the cartoons contain ethnic and racial stereotypes that may be offensive to modern audiences. However, like the fourth volume, the warning is shown on a title card rather than done as a special introduction. This is understandable, considering how often the caricature of a mammy used to appear in said cartoons from the golden era of American animation. A mammy, for the uninitiated, is a historical U.S. stereotype depicting black women who work in a white family and nurse the children. Often visualized as a larger-sized, dark-skinned woman with a motherly personality, the origin of this stereotype is rooted in the history of slavery in the States, as black women were often tasked with domestic and childcare work in white American slaveholding households. Because, as we all know, the one thing American families hate more than foreigners is raising their own kids. This stereotype was used to create a narrative of black women being happy within slavery or within a role of servitude, which really, I think, shows how people thought of women in general for a long time, but that's a whole other discussion. And while some mammy characters popped up regularly in the golden era of American animation, there's perhaps no more famous mammy than Aunt Jemima.
Aunt Jemima pancakes without her syrup is like the spring without the fall. There's only one thing worse in this universe. That's no Aunt Jemimas at all.
Aunt Jemimas without Aunt Jemima syrup?
That's ridiculous.
In 1888, the Pearl Milling Company developed and advertised the first ready-mix cooking product of a pancake mix. St. Joseph Gazette editor Chris L. Rutt and his friend Charles G. Underwood bought a small flour mill at 214 North 2nd Street in St. Joseph, Missouri. Facing a glutted flour market, their company produced flour, cornmeal, and in 1889, following some experimentation, began selling their excess flour as a pancake mix in paper bags. To distinguish their pancake mix, in the fall of 1889, Rutt appropriated the Aunt Jemima name and image from lithographed posters seen at a vaudeville house in St. Joseph, Missouri. However, they couldn't raise enough capital and quickly ran out of money, forcing them to sell the company to the Randolph Truett Davis Milling Company, located in the same area. The brand became successful enough through this change of hands that the Davis Milling Company was outright renamed Aunt Jemima Mills in February of 1914. However, in 1915, the brand was the basis for a trademark law ruling that set a new precedent. You see, previously, the United States trademark law had protected against infringement by other sellers of the same product, but under the Aunt Jemima doctrine, an actual combination of words that exists apparently, the seller of pancake mix was also protected against infringement by an unrelated seller of a different bi-related product, thusly, pancake syrup. Quaker Oats then bought the Aunt Jemima Mills Company in 1926 and formally registered the Aunt Jemima trademark in April of 1937, where it went on to become one of the longest continually running logos and trademarks in the history of American advertising. Until 2020.
The situation here in Santa Monica, California is very fluid. You can see police here now firing tear gas into the crowd. They are trying to push these folks back. Earlier today, just a few blocks away, there was looting underway nearby. Police seem to have had enough.
The nation erupted into scenes of chaos, violence, and widespread destruction into the early morning hours. Dozens of American cities up in flames after some protests turned into riots, often followed by looting as a nation simmering with unrest unraveled.
How long can you be peaceful when your people are dying?
But there was also troubling scenes caught on camera at the hands of police. This video appearing to show an officer putting his knee on the neck of someone taken into custody before another officer pulls his leg off. A shocking scene after the death of George Floyd, why so many poured into the streets.
We can't peacefully protest in the streets without getting tear gas thrown at us for what?
In this city, we care for each other. This is a time for us to unite.
Tonight, a nation on edge and up in smoke as many plead for peace in the wake of yet another violent night.
The cat and mouse game here in Santa Monica continues. You can see police are ready to move in on all these protesters again. The curfew starts in less than 30 minutes. Scenes like this are playing out all across the nation as the National Guard moves in.
Judge Peter Cahill, court is back in session.
I wanted to thank everybody for being here and for providing the input you did. Not just the people who were in the courtroom here, but also those who provided written statements, both from the Floyd family and the defendant's family.
In 2020, George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who went on to really face no consequences whatever, outside of mild social media ridiculing, at least at first. He was eventually, rightfully, sentenced to 21 years in prison on the charges of violating Floyd's civil rights, among other plea charges. And a lot of this couldn't have happened without the input of the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement, which had originated in 2013, then moved to national headlines and gained further attention as a result of their global protests against Floyd's murder. And in the wake of his murder, numerous brands scrambled to prove they were willing to do what it takes to update their image, which resulted in a glut of television episodes being pulled from streaming services, thanks to inferences of blackface, the classic Disney ride Splash Mountain closing thanks to its basis on the film Song of the South, and, most important to our story, brand and mascot retirement. George Floyd was murdered on May 25, 2020. On June 17th, less than a month later, Quaker Oats announced that Aunt Jemima brand would be discontinued and replaced with a new name and image to, quote, make progress towards racial equality. The image was removed from packaging in fall 2020, while the name change was said to be planned for a later date. Within 1 day of this announcement, other similarly motivated rebrandings of brand marketing were also announced, including Uncle Ben's Rice, Mrs. Butterworth's pancake syrup brand, and the Restus Black Chef logo used by Cream of Wheat. But there's something nobody really talks about in regards to this decision, which is that the descendants of Aunt Jemima models, Lillian Richard and Anna Short Harrington, objected to the change. Vera Harris, a family historian for the Richards family, said, I wish we would take a breath and not just get rid of everything, because good or bad, it's part of my history. While Harrington's great-grandson Larnell Evans said, this is an injustice for me and my family. This is our history. It seems to me that the people most interested in making this decision, besides a global conglomerate trying to save their bottom dollar, was uppity, well-to-do white people who wanted to prove how with it they were. For once, we had people who had actual attachment to the mascot speaking out, because Aunt Jemima wasn't just a character. Unlike an image on packaging or a cartoon in a commercial, Aunt Jemima actually had real, honest-to-God live-action portrayals. In fact, the African American Registry of the United States suggests that Nancy Green and others who played the caricature of Aunt Jemima should be celebrated, despite what has been widely condemned as a stereotypical and racist brand image. The registry even wrote, "We celebrate the birth of Nancy Green in 1834. She was a black storyteller and one of the very first corporate models in the United States." Following Green's work as the character, very few were actually well known, likely because advertising agencies would hire dozens of actors to portray the role, often assigned regionally, as the first organized sales promotion campaign. Quaker Oats, probably for the best, ended local appearances for Aunt Jemima in 1965. So let's talk about Nancy Green. Nancy Green was born into slavery in Montgomery County, Kentucky. She became the first spokesperson hired by the R.T. Davis Milling Company to portray the character, and while dressed as Aunt Jemima, appeared at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, beside the world's largest flour barrel, where she operated a pancake cooking display, sang songs, and told romanticized stories about the Old South. She went on to appear at fairs, festivals, flea markets, food shows, and local grocery stores. However, Green refused to cross the ocean for the 1900 Paris exhibition and was replaced by Agnes Moody, who only performed as Aunt Jemima at the Paris exhibition. Green eventually died in 1923 and was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave in Chicago's Oakwood Cemetery. In a case of severely circular timing, a headstone for her resting place was eventually erected on September 5th, 2020. And as much as I think we should respect the performers' descendants' feelings in regards to their family legacy, I think there's a few things we need to discuss in regards to Green and her time as Aunt Jemima. The first of which is how, after all she managed to accomplish, after all the work she did, she still was buried in a pauper's grave, which is just downright insulting. The second, and perhaps more questionable discussion is, here is a woman who is born into slavery, who then gets hired to play a character who romanticizes the Old South. There's a kind of sickness to that entire situation. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, she became an icon, arguably the icon. But on the other hand, she was almost promoting the idea that the life she'd been unfairly born into was a life worth defending. Slavery, in any and all forms, isn't worth defending, and yet here she is, being forced to say how great the South was to African Americans, when she knows firsthand how untrue this is. But all that aside, Aunt Jemima didn't exist solely as a meet-and-greet character, though. The Aunt Jemima minstrel-type variety radio program was broadcast from January 17, 1929 to June 5, 1953, at times on CBS, and had several hiatuses during its time on air. Aunt Jemima may in fact be the earliest account of a mascot getting such treatment. But the radio program was the least interesting, if you ask me, because in 1962, Aunt Jemima's Kitchen, originally named Aunt Jemima's Pancake House in 1955, was a restaurant that opened during the Civil Rights Movement as the official Aunt Jemima restaurant at, of all places, Disneyland. In addition to the restaurant, a woman portraying Aunt Jemima was poised at the restaurant to take pictures with its patrons. This may be, again, the first time a mascot preceded their own eatery. Then there were the paper doll family released in 1894 that could be cut out from the pancake box, and rag dolls offered as a premium in 1909, though the portrayal of these rag dolls was nothing to write home about, seeing as how early versions were portrayed as poor people with patches on their trousers, large mouths, and missing teeth, while later versions had cartoonish features including round eyes and watermelon mouths. So even back in the 1880s, mascots were giving the all-encompassing product treatment, complete with dolls, radio shows, and more. The only reason there's no slew of Aunt Jemima TV commercials is because there was no television in 1889. To be fair, it isn't like Aunt Jemima wasn't protested. African American women formed the Women's Columbian Association and the Women's Columbian Auxiliary Association to address the exclusion of African Americans from the 1893 World's Fair exhibition, asking that the fair reflect the success of post-emancipation African Americans. The fair, in their grand wisdom, decided to instead include a miniature of a West African village whose natives were portrayed as primitive savages. Black scholar Anna Julia Cooper wrote in her book in 1892, titled A Voice from the South, noting the fascination with Southern influence, ideas, and ideals had dictated to and domineered over the brain and sinew of this nation. These educated, progressive women saw a mammy for the national household represented at the World's Fair by Aunt Jemima, which had to be a tad uncomfortable, to put it mildly. Apparently, to these corporations, African Americans were good enough to use to promote their products, just not to garner respect as human beings. What's most interesting about PepsiCo's decision to retire the mascot is how, following the rebrand period of 2021, they said they wouldn't be able to completely abandon the Aunt Jemima brand due to trademark law, because if it does, a third party could obtain and use it. Perhaps, in this instance, it's in their best interest to keep it to themselves, solely so someone terrible doesn't buy and use the brand. The Aunt Jemima name, however, was retired and the company was rebranded Pearl Milling, the same name of the company that produced the original mix to begin with. We finally come full circle. Look, there's a lot to take in here, and there was a lot of context necessary to explain why this mascot exists and why they were retired. Floyd's murder was like a domino effect, except a lot of what companies did isn't what movements like Black Lives Matter or the African American community actually wants. Sure, retiring a racist, offensive mascot is a nice gesture, but it pales in comparison to maybe ensuring that African Americans just stop being oppressed altogether. Pulling a few seemingly offensive, but not actually offensive, episodes of a TV sitcom isn't going to fix the political landscape to ease the racial tension of the country we're currently facing. We are not saying the retirement is a bad idea, but it's not the solution. Of course, neither myself nor our writer Maggie are African American, and so our 2 cents probably means diddly squat, as it should. These decisions should be left up to the people who are actively affected by them. These discussions are best left to the people who actively live with the consequences of a nasty history. We are just trying to give you some idea who Aunt Jemima was and why she's no more. People like to tell those in entertainment to keep their political opinions to themselves, as if somehow having a career involved in the arts removes you of any and all personal beliefs, stripping you of your right to think what you want and use your platform for the greater good simply because you can. A doctor doesn't lose their rights to their beliefs simply because they perform a certain necessary task in society, unless, of course, those beliefs are directly harmful to their patients, but that's a whole other can of worms. We had opinions long before we decided to make a show. Take from that what you want. We're just trying to do the right thing and help the minority communities get their recognition, even if we aren't a part of said community ourselves. It's just the right thing to do. I'm Cody Streeter, and this has been Cultural Adpropriation.
I tried to sign a peace treaty, but my peace pipe got stolen by a cop. Yeah, he didn't understand. He just snatched it from my hand, smashed it on the fucking ground, hold my ass off to the pound. Yeah, that's where I spent the night, but thank God at least I'm white. Otherwise I would be bleeding on the sidewalk screaming, oh.